Welcome to this class on fluid mechanics. And in today's and maybe the next lecture, we will look at a special class of flows where effects of viscosity can be neglected. So, for effects of viscosity to be neglected, we'll call that there will be two conditions. Either we could have the coefficient of viscosity is very small or very close to zero, or as we have seen using identity 2 written above, in the last class we saw this, that if the flow is incompressible and del cross V is equal to 0, then del square V is equal to 0, and this implies that the viscous term becomes 0 irrespective of the value of mu. So if this is the case, then viscous term of the Navier-Stokes equations is equal to 0 irrespective of mu. And we realize that for this second apparently more general case to hold, the condition which we need is that del cross V must be 0. Now this quantity del cross V, this is a vector quantity, and this we define as vorticity. In fluid mechanics and in understanding of fluid mechanics, vorticity will have a very important role, and we use a symbol for vorticity. We use the symbol omega with a vector sign for vorticity. Some textbooks use the symbol Z for vorticity. So we will use the symbol omega, and if we look at the quantity omega, that means the vorticity, this is del cross V. So in Cartesian coordinates, this will be equal to ijk d by dx, d by dy, d by dz, vx, vy, vz. For other forms, you can refer to the handout, and this becomes equal to I times partial vz by partial y minus partial vy by partial z plus j times partial vx by partial z minus partial vz by partial x, and the third component k times now the quantity vorticity. You realize that we have cross derivatives of velocity. That means in this if we have Vx, then the derivatives which are involved in vorticity are y and z, not the x derivative, and so on. So now if we look at two-dimensional flow, in two-dimensional flow, vorticity is equal to omega zk, or sometimes we will also use the symbol omega just alone without any subscript with k. And here what we can show is the angular velocity of a fluid element. This is equal to half of del cross V, or half of omega, the scalar omega. So that means vorticity is directly related to angular velocity. And what do we mean by angular velocity? The rotation of the element, and since this is 2D flow, about z-axis for the 2D flow. So this rate of rotation, or rather I should probably use rate of rotation, and rate of rotation will be half of omega. So vorticity seems to be related to how the fluid element is rotating or not. But we should not confuse it with the shape of streamlines. And because we know, as we have seen, that we can have curved path on which a body may translate. We have seen this in the rigid body dynamics, that there could be curvilinear translation. So when we talk of rotation, we are saying the element, if we fix an axis to the body, then the coordinate axes, one or two of them at least, will change their directions. And to illustrate this point, let us look at two types of flows. First, let us look at the shear flow, which we have seen, the Couette flow, where the streamlines, where the velocity profile is like this. So this is the Couette flow. Velocity is equal to capital U y by h. This is what we had seen. Now here, if we look at the streamlines, since there is only x component of velocity, so streamlines will all be straight. The streamlines are straight lines in this flow. Now here, if I put an element of solid, if I put, let's say, a cross where the hatch is at the top, and if I put it in the flow, then what you will find is, at the top of the cross, Vx is greater than Vx at the bottom of the cross. So if a fluid element is shaped like this, of course the cross has been put to show the directional this thing. So what will happen is, after some time, the top part will move more, the bottom part will move less, and we will have this cross will change its orientation. And so even in a flow with straight streamlines, individual fluid elements can rotate. And we can contrast it with a flow with circular streamlines, a flow where del cross V is equal to 0, and we will be showing such flows. If such a flow is there, then what you find is, even though the streamlines may be circular, but if I put a cross in this flow, as it moves along the streamline, its orientation of fluid particles will not change as they move. And this is sort of like the case of curvilinear translation. Next, let us define a quantity called circulation. And circulation is defined for a closed curve in a fluid. So this symbol for circulation normally which we use is this, which is capital gamma. The Greek symbol gamma, which in small form looks like here, like small gamma looks like this, but capital gamma is written like this. And what is circulation? Circulation is the line integral of tangential component of velocity along a closed curve. So what we do is, in a flow, so there is flow taking place, we choose a closed curve. And this closed curve encloses an area A. So here the line is the curve and shaded region is the area A. So now what we do is we go along the curve. Now this, at each point in the curve there is a velocity v. We choose an element of length ds, and along the length ds, this gives us the direction of tangent to the curve, and let the velocity make an angle alpha with ds. So therefore what we have to do is we have to take the velocity v dotted with ds, which will be equal to, in scalar term it will be v cos alpha ds, and this we integrate along the entire closed curve. So we keep on taking v cos alpha ds, so this is the tangent ds direction, this angle is alpha, so we take v cos alpha multiplied by ds, go all around the curve and calculate this. And this quantity for that closed curve is what we call the circulation. Okay, now we invoke what is called Green's theorem, which is in some sense a variation of Stokes' theorem. And what Green's theorem tells us is integral on a closed curve of any vector dotted with ds is equal to the area integral of the curl of that vector, which is of that vector on the area, and this area dA is the area which is enclosed by the curve S. So that means to calculate the right hand side, we choose an element dA on the area and we calculate del cross V multiplied by dA, and then we integrate along this entire area. So this is basically the Green's theorem, which tells us that circulation is equal to integral on the area of omega times dA. Okay, so this is the meaning of this quantity. Now here, of course, when we say del cross V, and this is, so we are taking the magnitude of omega. So magnitude of omega times dA, we add it up over the entire area. And what we have is, if along on some area A or on that domain, if omega is equal to 0, this will mean that the circulation will be equal to 0 on any closed curve in that area. So circulation and vorticity are related. Next we define a term and we define a class of flows called irrotational flows. And irrotational flows are those flows, these are the flows where omega is equal to 0 or vorticity is 0 in the entire flow domain. So flows where vorticity is 0 are called as irrotational flows, and the reason we study them is that they are considerably simpler than flows where omega is not equal to 0. And as we have already seen that there is a relation between irrotational flows and inviscid flows. Inviscid flows are the ones where mu is equal to 0. And if mu is equal to 0, then there is another name which we use, the Navier-Stokes equations. They are referred to as Euler's equations. So Euler's equations are nothing but Navier-Stokes equations are Navier-Stokes equations with viscous term being equal to 0. That means Euler's equations are partial V by partial T plus V dot grad V is equal to minus grad P by rho. I have included the gravity here. And then we have plus, in general in Navier-Stokes this is there, but when this is 0, then we get Euler's equations. And we have seen that these are also the governing equations for the case when we have irrotational flows and incompressible flows, then also we get Euler's equations as our governing equations. So that means Euler's equations are valid for A, cases where mu is equal to 0, or B, when omega is equal to 0 and del dot V is equal to 0. Then we will get this equation. Okay. Now what we do is, on this flow, let's now write Euler's equation. We'll write the full form. Partial V by partial T plus V dot grad V is equal to minus grad P by rho plus G. I have divided the equations by rho. Now what I do is, let us use identity 1. What was identity 1? Identity 1 said, and what we are going to use is, we want to use V dot grad V term. So V dot grad V, which is in the left hand side of Euler's equations or Navier-Stokes equations, becomes half gradient of V dot V minus V cross omega. And minus of V cross omega can be written as omega cross V. So now when we put this, identity 1 is put in for this term, and what we get is partial V by partial T plus gradient of V square by 2 plus omega cross V. There was a minus sign, but we have interchanged V cross omega by omega cross V, and then we take this on the other side plus grad P by rho minus G is equal to 0. So this is also equally valid form of Euler's equation. Okay. Now here the first thing we do is, let us take this whole equation and we dot it with a small dr, where dr in general we can write it as dxi plus dyj plus dzk. That means we are taking a dot product of these equations with a small directional movement. So we say dv by dt plus gradient of v square by 2 plus omega cross v plus grad of p by rho minus g dotted with dr is equal to 0. Okay. Now let us look at this term omega cross v dotted with dr, and let us see when is this term omega cross v dotted with dr, when is this 0. So clearly case A will be when omega is 0. That means we are talking of irrotational flow. Case B, when V is 0, which is a trivial case, we'll not like to consider that. And case C is when dr is parallel to V. That means the distance along which you are moving is parallel to velocity. Now when does this happen? When will dr be parallel to V? Dr will be parallel to V if dr is along a streamline. So that means either we are moving along a streamline, if dr is along that, then omega cross v dot dr is 0, or if omega is 0 in the flow, then also omega cross v dotted with dr is 0. The second thing what we'd like to see is if we have grad of any quantity dotted with dr, what does this mean? This gives you the total change of this quantity along dr. That is the physical meaning of gradient of some quantity dotted with dr. It tells you the rate of change of this quantity which is there, grad of which is being taken, how that is changing along this dr. So now, having seen these two interpretations, let us see the case. Let us say that either in the flow omega is 0 or dr is along a streamline. So if these two cases are there, omega cross v dotted with dr is 0, and what we are left with is partial v by partial t dotted with dr plus now gradient dotted with dr we will change to the total rate of change of v square by 2 plus then we have the next is gradient of p by rho, so that will become dp by rho, and then we have g dotted with dr will become g, the gravity vector times dz is equal to 0. There was a minus with g, but then g is equal to minus k, so g dotted with dr, this becomes equal to minus gk dotted with dz of k, and this will give you minus g times dr, or minus g times dz, and because there is a minus sign, so this becomes plus g dz is equal to 0. So this is what we are getting from the momentum equation. We have not used anything else, and notice here v square which we have used is nothing but v dotted with v, and actually this is twice the kinetic energy per unit mass. We have v square by 2, so that is actually kinetic energy per unit mass. Now what we do is we integrate this expression from point 1 to point 2 along dr. So along this part which is moving, so what we will get is integral from 1 to 2 partial v by partial t dotted with dr plus integral from 1 to 2 dp by rho plus v2 square minus v1 square, that comes from the d of v square by 2 from 2 to 1, and plus g times z2 minus z1 is equal to 0. Now you can see where we are leading to. If we are talking of, so this is the equation which we have got. This is come from the differential momentum equation. We have looked at the momentum equation of inviscid flows, inviscid or irrotational flows. The momentum equation gives to this, and you can very easily see the shape of this. Well, I forgot a 2 here, so I've put that here now. And you can look at the form of these equations. Does it remind you of something? Obviously, this reminds us of the well-known Bernoulli's equation. And what we have is, if for steady incompressible flow we get standard or classic form of Bernoulli's equation. And now notice this is coming as a differential equation, that P2 minus P1 by rho plus V2 square minus V1 square by 2 plus G times Z2 minus Z1 is equal to 0. So this is coming for, this is for steady inviscid, so that's why we had omega, we had this del square V term is equal to 0. Incompressible, so we have now taken this P2 minus P1 by rho as common, and then we have the condition either omega is 0 or we are along a streamline. So if that is so, then this other term became 0, and that is why this is the standard form of Bernoulli's equation which we get. Now what we see here is that now we look at this as a solution. We don't look at this as an integral equation, but we look at this as, or integral flow analysis, we look at this as a solution of the differential momentum equation. The momentum equation, when we integrate it along a streamline, gives us this form. So therefore, and what we will see is that in the irrotational flows, this equation, Bernoulli's equation, this will give us the relation between pressure and velocity. How did we get this equation, this relation in the Navier-Stokes equations? If you realize, in the Navier-Stokes equation, we had minus partial p by partial x, partial p by partial y, and partial p by partial z in the Navier-Stokes momentum equation. In full Navier-Stokes equations, we had partial p by partial x, partial p by partial y in momentum equation, and there was no equation for pressure. And what we had was, plus there was a continuity equation, del dot V is equal to 0. But for irrotational inviscid flows, what we find is that pressure can be determined from Bernoulli's equation. And there is no extra assumption being made except that the flow is irrotational and inviscid. So with this we are able to get pressure directly from Bernoulli's equation, but to know pressure we'll need to know velocity. So in some sense the pressure equation and the velocity equations have decoupled. Velocity we will find from the Euler's equations or some other source, but once if, so that means what we are saying is if velocity is known, then pressure can be found. So in some sense we can say that this is the decoupling of pressure equation and the velocity equation. Of course, this is the simple case. In case if the flow is unsteady or pressure is a function of density, then there is a slightly more complex form. We have to integrate this equation to get pressure. But that also is much simpler than solving the full Navier-Stokes equations. So we'll revert back to this, but now let us move to a class of flows called irrotational flows. And we will find the equations become quite simple in this class. So that means obviously irrotational flows we have already defined. These are the flows where vorticity is 0 everywhere. Now we have this equation. That means these flows del cross V is equal to 0 for all regions in the domain. Okay. Now we have an identity, and this you might recall. In fact, there are two vector identities. There's an identity, again I'll say identity A and B to differentiate. One is that div of curl of any quantity is equal to 0, and the other is curl of gradient of any quantity is equal to 0. Okay. So these are identities. They hold for any vector for identity A and any scalar for identity B. Now in irrotational flows we realize del cross V is 0. This will always be 0 if the flow is irrotational. Now we know this is curl. So what we are saying is curl of V is 0 by definition of irrotational flows. This implies that velocity can be written as gradient of phi, where phi is any scalar. Because del cross V is 0 and we know del cross grad phi, curl of gradient, this is basically del cross gradient of phi. Curl of gradient is always 0, so therefore velocity can be written as gradient of phi. So this quantity phi for irrotational flows, we call it velocity potential. And since velocity is equal to gradient of phi, if we want to find velocity, then phi will be determined up to one arbitrary constant, because phi itself has no meaning, it is only the gradient of phi, so one constant can be arbitrary, and this we can say that datum of phi can be chosen arbitrarily. And this is like the potential energy. In fact, phi has been referred to as the velocity potential. This is like the potential energy which we have seen in the first course in mechanics, and you can choose the datum for that potential energy mgz term anywhere. So here also the datum for phi can be chosen at any place. Now here another note I will put: certain textbooks define V is equal to minus gradient of phi. And it really doesn't matter. This minus sign comes from the fact that you want the flow to go from higher potential to lower potential. So that is why you put it as minus gradient of phi. But in this lecture, in this course, we will be using the notation gradient of phi. So the difference between our phi and the phi where it is velocity, and those cases where velocity is defined as minus gradient of phi, will be a minus sign, but that will not affect anything. So that means what we have so far shown is, if flow is irrotational, then velocity can be written as gradient of phi. Now let us say the flow, we put the second condition, flow is also incompressible. So this is condition 2. If the flow is incompressible, then whether it is 2D or 3D, we know del dot V is equal to 0. So therefore, if we put this along with condition 1, then we get del dot gradient of phi is equal to 0. So for incompressible irrotational flows, we get the governing equation as del dot grad phi is equal to 0, and this becomes del square phi is equal to 0. That means we have a very simple equation for velocity. I am saying it for velocity because I take gradient of phi, I will get velocity, and this equation for velocity becomes del square phi is equal to 0. And this equation, as we know, this is also called Laplace equation, and so far the only conditions we have imposed are incompressible and irrotational flows. So only conditions imposed are incompressible and irrotational flows. Actually, we have not even put the condition for inviscid flows because we don't need that. We only need incompressible and irrotational flows, and in Cartesian coordinates, that means the governing equations for these flows becomes partial d2 phi by dx square plus d2 phi by dy square plus d2 phi by dz square is equal to 0. And this is the governing equation for velocity for phi, and hence the governing equation for v. Okay, and this equation, which you realize, this is a linear equation. Del square phi is equal to 0 is a Laplace's equation, very well known equation, and this is a linear equation. Now in these flows, how will you get the pressure? Velocity will come from this equation. How will you get the pressure? And the pressure will come from Bernoulli's equation, that we will first solve del square phi is equal to 0. From here we will get V, and then we will then use Bernoulli equation to get P. Now to use Bernoulli equation, we are using an extra condition that the flow is inviscid. But realize, because this flow is already irrotational and incompressible, mu del square V term is already 0, so we don't even need, so we do not need the condition mu is equal to 0. We can directly use Bernoulli's equation. So now, what is our claim? Just look at this. Our claim is that if I have irrotational and incompressible flow, student A or case A for this flow solves the Navier-Stokes equations plus the continuity equation and gets values of V and P. Student B solves del square phi is equal to 0 and uses Bernoulli equation to get P. So first the student will solve del square phi is equal to 0, then they will get velocity from here, and then they use Bernoulli equation to get P. And our claim is that processes A and B are identical. We are solving the same set of equations and we will get this. Okay. Now, one of the things or subtle things which one can see here is that in claim A, Navier-Stokes equations are nonlinear. And in what we do in B, we solve del square phi is equal to 0, which is basically a linear equation. Then what has happened to the non-linearity of the Navier-Stokes equation? Has it vanished or is it still there? And the answer is the non-linearity comes in Bernoulli's equation, because pressure is related to velocity as v square by 2. So here the nonlinear term is in the velocity. But as far as the solution goes, the linear solution works. So we first solve for v, and because pressure and velocity are decoupled, actually we are solving, as far as solving goes, we do not do any nonlinear equation. Now the second question, so nonlinearity we have answered. The second thing which we ask is, what about unsteadiness? Are these equations valid for steady flows or unsteady flows? And the answer to this is, let's try to first look at the unsteady term. The unsteady term is partial v by partial t dotted with dr. This we can write it as partial by partial t of gradient of phi dotted with dr, and this will become partial phi by partial t. So therefore, for unsteady equation, the Bernoulli equation becomes partial phi by partial t plus d of v dot v by 2 plus dp by rho plus g dz is equal to 0. So the unsteadiness is still there in Bernoulli's equation. Now what about the momentum equation? The momentum equation for this class of flows is nothing but del square phi is equal to 0. That means momentum equation has no unsteady term. For irrotational, incompressible flows, there is no unsteady term in the momentum equation. So therefore, if phi is equal to phi of x, y, z, t, then where does dependence on t, how does it come? Because the equation, there is no unsteady term, so dependence on t or dependence of phi on t will come only from the boundary conditions. If in the boundary conditions phi is equal to phi of t on the boundary, then phi will become phi of t in the interior also. And what this is saying is that whatever unsteadiness is there on the boundary, that unsteadiness is immediately transmitted to the inner points in the domain. So any change in time on the boundary immediately gets reflected inside, and this is happening because the flow is incompressible. And in compressible flows, there can be time effects also, but then these equations will not be valid. So if the boundary conditions are such that at the boundary phi is not phi of t, then the flow will be steady. From the equation, no unsteadiness comes, because once phi is not equal to phi of t, then phi in any domain, it will not be throughout the domain will not be function of t. And then if phi is not a function of t, in the Bernoulli's equation also, this term partial phi by partial t will go away. Now there is another very important consequence here, and this is the consequence of linearity. We have been emphasizing this at many times, and let's now try to discuss this fully. Phi, as we have seen, is governed by a linear equation. So since phi is governed by a linear equation, now that means if we have phi 1 is boundary condition 1, if we have boundary, let's repeat this argument. I'll just repeat this again. So if we have boundary condition 1, and these boundary conditions give us the solution, they lead to the solution phi 1. And if there is another boundary condition 2, and these lead to the solution phi 2. So that means with boundary condition 1, we get solution phi 1. With boundary condition 2, we get solution phi 2. Then if the boundary conditions 1 plus boundary condition 2 are imposed together, so we add the two boundary conditions, then phi 1 plus phi 2 will also give us the solution. So that means if I have two sets of boundary conditions, I don't need to add them and find the solution for phi. I can find a solution for phi 1 with boundary condition 1. I can find a solution for phi with boundary condition 2, call it phi 2. Add these two solutions and this will give me the solution of a flow where the boundary conditions are put together. Okay, so this really tells us that we can make simple solutions and then add them up together by superposing the solutions. Okay, so now let's see if we have solved, let's say this phi 1 was for boundary condition 1 and we got velocity v1 and pressure p1 corresponding to phi 1. Phi 2 was the solution for boundary condition 2 and corresponding to that we got v2 and pressure p2. Now what we have said is phi 1 plus phi 2 gives us also a valid solution. That means from phi 1 if I have to get v1, how do I get it? Gradient of phi 1. From phi 2 if I have to get v2, how do I get gradient of phi 2? But gradient of phi 1 plus gradient of phi 2 will be equal to gradient of phi 1 plus phi 2. So that means from here, if I directly take this thing, the velocities can also be superposed. So velocities can be superposed because velocities are linear functions of phi's and phi's can be superposed. What about pressure? If for this flow where phi 1 plus phi 2 has been superposed with the boundary conditions, v1 plus v2 is a solution. Now we asked, is the pressure in this flow equal to p1 plus p2 or is it something else? And the answer to that is that pressure in this flow will not be equal to P1 plus P2. To find pressure, what you will have to do is you first superpose V1 plus V2 and then use Bernoulli's equation. And that will give you the pressure because now this V1 plus V2, when you use Bernoulli's equation, you will have V1 plus V2 dotted with V1 plus V2. And this clearly is not equal to V1 dotted with V1 plus V2 dotted with V2. So pressure cannot be superposed. Okay, so this is what we have. Now let us look at the boundary conditions. Let us discuss what are the boundary conditions which are needed to solve Euler's equations. And let's first start from Euler's equations and let's see what happens. Now Euler's equations are rho times partial v by partial t plus v dot grad v is equal to rho times g minus grad p. Now this is the equation because mu del square v is equal to 0. Now what we realize is that the order of the differential equation has gone down by 1 because our governing equations only have first order terms. So now this Euler's equation is a first order differential equation. Why? Because del square v is equal to 0 and this was the second order term d2v by dx square etc etc. Now there is no second derivative. Because there is no second derivative, so that means we will need one less boundary condition as compared to the full Navier-Stokes equations which were second order. Now the boundary condition which we use, if we look at the velocity boundary condition, the velocity boundary condition we used for Navier-Stokes equation was the normal component of velocity is equal to 0 and the tangential component of velocity is equal to 0. So that means when we solve the inviscid for inviscid and or irrotational problems, we need to reduce one boundary condition. Need to relax or reduce one boundary condition. Now we have Vt is equal to 0 and Vn is equal to 0. Which boundary condition should be relaxed for mu is equal to 0 or omega is equal to 0? Now what we see is on a solid boundary, which of these boundary conditions seems to come from the viscous effects? Vn is equal to 0 or Vt is equal to 0. So we should drop the condition which comes from viscous effects, because now we are dropping viscosity, and even when we say irrotational, it's the cross derivative. So once again it's the viscous effects which come into picture, and obviously the condition which comes from viscosity is the tangential component of velocity is equal to 0, and this will not be imposed on in irrotational flows on a solid wall. So that means the flow will be allowed to slip. No slip boundary condition is relaxed. The flow is allowed. That means, so the boundary condition to be used in irrotational flows will be the normal component of velocity is equal to 0, and this will become partial phi by partial n on a solid boundary is equal to 0. Of course, this condition Vn is equal to 0 comes from mass balance. So this condition will now not be will be imposed, but the Vt, the slip can take place on the surface of a solid surface. So for example, if we talk of flow on a solid plate, so if this is x, this is y, the boundary condition in inviscid flow we will put will be Vy is equal to 0 at y is equal to 0, Vx is equal to 0 at y is equal to 0, this will not be imposed. So now this is what we have seen for the irrotational flows. In the next class, we will look at these flows for two-dimensional case, and we will see some very interesting effects. So in the next class, we will look at 2D incompressible irrotational flows. So this is what will be done in the next class. Thank you.